Hello, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Michelle's husband, Barack. And this is Aisha's husband.
I say, keep it real.
Steph. How's everybody doing today? Before we get started, I just want to say thank you to Oaktown, City of Oakland, for doing a great job hosting us here today. Got the mayor right in the house, and thank you, Madam Mayor. I want to thank all the organizers who've put in enormous efforts in making this happen, but most importantly, I want to thank the young people who are participating here today, because this is all about you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to somebody who has brought a lot of joy to this area. And even Bulls fans have to acknowledge that it's been fun to watch the Warriors and the greatest shooter of all time, because I gave him some tips right before, about 5 seasons ago. There's film of this in the White House. Mr. Steph Curry.
Thank you very much, President Obama. This is a very, very humbling experience to be in front of you guys in Oakland, where my true story really has started. And in the last 10 years I've been here, really proud to represent Oakland, represent my team, and taking us to new heights. So to be here in this city, it only feels right. To be able to host you and the entire MBK program, it means a lot. So I think I want to start. We obviously know why we're all here and celebrating what MBK means and what it has done and the future plans. But I want to kind of take it back to where the initial seed was planted. What was your initial motivation behind the initiative? And really, I guess, what has changed from the start to post-presidency and the plans that you guys have been trying to initiate for sure?
Well, from the moment that I was elected president, I was constantly thinking about how do we make sure that everybody in this country has opportunity and every child is valued. And although this is the greatest country on earth and there are still people who are able to rise despite disadvantages, the fact of the matter is that there are a lot of neighborhoods that are still left behind. There are a lot of young people who sadly don't have the resources, don't have the support, don't have the attention that other communities have. And so we were working on a whole range of issues, from education to health care, you name it. But when Trayvon Martin was killed while I was in office, and some of you remember, although actually some of you are so young you may not, I was asked to speak on the issue, and as somebody who is the head of federal law enforcement, I could not comment on the particulars of the case, but what I could say was that Trayvon could have been my son. And the fact that not just Trayvon, but every single day there were young men of color who were being shot and killed, that every single day there were young men who were dropping out of school. Every single day there were too many who were more likely to end up in prison than in college, required us as a society to wake up and to find ways in which we could come together and say to all of our, particularly young men of color who on a whole bunch of indicators were having a more difficult time in this society for a whole range of historical reasons, we had to be able to say to them, you matter. We care about you. We believe in you, and we are going to make sure that you have the opportunities and chances to move forward just like everybody else. And so it's out of that we decided to set up My Brother's Keeper. And the idea was that the government had a role to play in making sure that policies were put in place that weren't systematically disadvantaging young men of color. For example, statistically, it was shown that black boys, Latino boys, Native American boys were far more likely to be disciplined, suspended, and expelled from school, oftentimes for behaving the same way that other boys were behaving, but there were different standards in terms of how they were judged in school. So, for example, the Department of Education, we created different guidelines that said, here's how you should think about discipline, because these are not disposable young people. These are our future, and we've got to make sure we're investing in them. But what we also knew is that just having the government do something wasn't going to be enough. We had to mobilize communities, and we had to mobilize young people themselves so that they could find ways to support each other. And we put out a challenge around the country, and we had over 200 communities, from big cities to small towns, to Native American reservations who took up that challenge and said, we're going to try to set up programs that support our young men, give them opportunities, provide them mentoring, provide them apprenticeships, provide them job training, focus on making sure that if they're not going to a four-year college, that they've got some sort of technical program that they can get into. And we could not be prouder of all the communities around the country that took up the baton and initiated programs that have made a difference in the lives of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of young men over the last several years. Now, I lost my job because that's the way it works, you know, you get retired. So I had less immediate influence on the federal government programs, but the community programs we could continue to initiate. And so as part of the overall Obama Foundation, what we said was we're going to keep My Brother's Keeper alive. And and thanks to the outstanding work that was being done in local communities, and some of the key leaders from across the country are gathered here today, that spirit of investing in boys and young men of color has continued and thrived, so that, for example, an organization in Chicago that I sat down in a circle with some young men in a high school, Hyde Park High School, right across from where we're building our library, a program called BAM, Becoming a Man, outstanding program. Started off with 400 young leaders involved. Now they've got 7,000. They just started a new chapter in Boston. And, you know, you have communities like Yonkers that are initiating, Yonkers in the house, that are initiating outstanding violence prevention programs. The same is taking place in San Juan, Puerto Rico, where you've already seen success in drastically reducing violence, increasing school attendance. And so it's really communities themselves that are mobilizing. And the purpose of this summit was, number one, to say 5 years after this started, we're not going anywhere. We're still going to continue to make progress across the country. Number two, we wanted to make sure to lift up those organizations that are successful and bring them together so they can learn from each other, figure out what are the best ways to intervene and support and provide a voice to young men in our communities. And number three, and most importantly, give us an opportunity to see outstanding young men all across the country that are not reported on enough, who are doing positive work, who are leaders in their communities, who are succeeding in school, who are supporting their brothers, who are being respectful to their sisters, who are the kinds of young men that are going to be leaders of this country in the future. And that story is not told often enough. And the young men who are sitting on this stage and who are in the audience, they represent that kind of excellence. And for us to be able to bring them together so that they can learn from each other, support each other, and ultimately lead together, that's the thing that's most important to us.
One of the most exciting things I heard since I showed up today was when we did our PSA about 4 years ago, where you taught me how to keep my elbow in.
Exactly. Yeah, he was.
Helped me.
He was kind of.
I was kind of chicken winging.
Chicken winging a little bit, and it wasn't working. So.
You helped me with my resume.
That's exactly right.
All that kind of good stuff. Right. Obviously, I had the best mentor in that regard. But in terms of from that PSA, the action and the following that we've been able to accumulate in a short amount of time, 50,000
new mentors. Yeah,
have signed up since.
Outstanding.
PSA. So talking about the acknowledgement and the understanding the impact we can all have in terms of what our expertises are, our perspective on the world, and mobilizing in our communities. The action has been followed, and it's all because of the idea that you had at the beginning.
Well, it helped that you were in the PSA. Let's face it, nobody wanted to see my jump shot. But it does raise this question, Steph, and I know there are other folks who were here. Richard Sherman was by, and obviously John is an amazing musician. One of the challenges I think that we all face is how do we support young men who oftentimes don't have fathers now, or don't have a relationship with their fathers. I was one of those young people. I didn't know my father very well. I met him once, and that was it. And I know that you've spoken about how important your father was in your life. I thought it'd be useful for you to reflect on, now that you are a father yourself, but you also have friends who maybe didn't have that presence in their lives the way Del was a presence in your life. How does that make you think about the need to mentor and support young men who maybe don't have that role model right in front of them, and who's providing the support and focus that your father was able to give you?
I was definitely a fortunate, upbringing where my dad, he played 16 years in the NBA, and everybody asked me, like, what's the biggest, advice that he gave you? What's the thing he said that, really shaped your perspective on the world and kind of gave you the confidence to go out and be the person that I am today? There wasn't one thing he specifically said. It was the consistent presence that he had and how he carried himself, and me being able to just witness that on a daily basis that gave me a moral compass, to be honest, about how I should carry myself, no matter what my passion was in life. It obviously ended up being basketball, but how I carried myself in the classroom, how I carried myself at home, how I treated people, whether they could do anything for me or not. The way that he carried himself on the daily, my eyeballs were just locked in. And to your point around some, kids that and young men that don't have that presence, it has awakened me to a responsibility that we have with the platforms that we have, and the sense of visibility that I have, that how I carry myself, how I speak, and what I'm educated on, my willingness to try to meet people where they are, can make a huge difference, whether it's 5 seconds, 10 minutes, multiple, run-ins. We all have an opportunity to use that platform, that visibility, to shape somebody's perspective, and that one moment can be a difference maker for a lifetime. And so for me, it's and I know I can speak for a lot of my teammates and people in our league as well. The social responsibility we feel to take a stand for things that we believe in, look out for the next generation. I could speak on how all of my teammates are using the resources they have, to impact their communities, whether it's here in Oakland, where they're from. There's a movement, and there's a collective awareness and responsibility that I think we're all buying into and tapping into and taking responsibility for, and we understand how impactful it can be. And my dad set that example for me, and I want to be able to give that back.
Outstanding. And, one of the points Steph made is consistency. And look, for all kinds of historical reasons, discrimination, mass incarceration, lack of job opportunities, et cetera, oftentimes fathers, men, may not have been able to provide that consistency the way, in retrospect, they might want to. But the one thing we've learned from watching all the amazing programs that are taking place across the country is that we can all be surrogate fathers. We can all be big brothers. it turns out that if you just give somebody some attention and say, you know what, you matter. How are you doing? How are you thinking about your next steps? Do you really think that's the best thing to do? People respond to that. So my father might not have been in my house, but there were a whole bunch of men around who taught me something and guided me. And look, it goes without saying, I want to be really clear about this. The amazing job that single moms are doing raising kids, and the love and support and energy that they're providing is, that's the foundation. But what is true is that it's hard for a mom to do it by herself. And you now have small kids, right? Kids will wear you out. And if you're just by yourself and you don't have a support system where you're able to say, man, I'm tired of this knucklehead. Here, you take him for a while. And that can if somebody's working, somebody else might be able to cover for the other parent. It's difficult for somebody by themselves to do all of what's required. And that's why I think the kinds of mentoring programs and initiatives that we've been seeing through My Brother's Keepers end up being so important. And you're right. If we can get 50,000 more mentors, that means we can get 100,000 more mentors, because I guarantee you there's still more young men out there who could use an adult in their lives who are just paying attention and there consistently for them. And it doesn't take a lot of work, but it does require that you actually care.
And a point you just made, these kids up here on the stage, because in the audience, all around this community and this country and in the world, really, they matter. So we want to turn it over to these kids to hopefully see what kind of questions they have on their minds, and we can hopefully give them a little bit of information. I say myself, you really want to hear what this guy has to say, but I'll chime in every once in a while. But Michael, we got a kind of a list of how we want to go about it.
Yep, Mr. President, Steph, we've got a couple dozen young men from all over the country representing My Brother's Keeper programs, working on everything from youth violence prevention to mentoring to changing policy, our future. And so we've got a few questions that we'll get to. Our first question is from Raul, from both of you, for both of you, who wants to talk a little bit about growing up.
Hello. My name is Raul Chavira. I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I go to school at Native American Community Academy. My question for you is kind of a two-part question. It's like, what were some of the struggles that you went through as a kid, and how did you get through it without the MBK Alliance?
Well, Steph, why don't you talk a little bit about some of your struggles with your ankles, man?
That's a sensitive subject.
I mean,
oh, man.
You know, it worked out, so he can talk about it now, because he won 2 MVPs after that.
That's pretty good. I got no comeback for that one. Yeah, I just have to wear these big bionic braces now. So I had to overcome my ankles with these braces. No, I think my major struggle was the self-confidence, to be honest with you. Growing up with a passion to play basketball and people thinking that my future was kind of destined based on what my dad did, that wasn't the case for me. My journey was entirely different. And just in life in general, self-confidence was something that wasn't always natural for me. It took me a while to get to a place where I was comfortable in a room or comfortable dealing with challenges and understanding that I had it in me. I had the talent, I had to believe, or had the talent and the skill set, but the confidence to kind of get over that hump was a process, and I had to rely on the community that was around me to get me through that. Now, I always tell people, you have to be your biggest cheerleader at times, but that's harder to do than you might think. The village that was around me were my biggest supporters and trying to, allow me to understand what I was capable of, to not back down from any challenge. I understand that I was put on this earth for a reason, and and whatever that was going to manifest itself with, my attention to detail, my work ethic, and things like that. But it was a constant struggle. So the swagger and the confidence you see on the court right now, it wasn't always there. It took me a minute to get there, but I had to continue to grind. And so wherever you are in that process, just keep fighting.
Yeah. For me, and I've written about this, I've talked about this. I was all kinds of screwed up when I was in high school. So many of you are way ahead of where I was at the time in terms of your accomplishments and your focus and your commitment to something larger than yourself. For me, I was a good kid in the sense that I think I was always kind to people. I didn't have a mean spirit. But I did not have a sense of purpose or a clear sense of direction through a a big chunk of my my high school years. And in retrospect, I recognize some of it was I was angry about my father not being there. Some of it was I was growing up in an environment as a African American boy where we didn't have a large African American community. So there were all kinds of reasons for why I was acting out the way I did. And we didn't have my brother's keeper. I did have a foundation of love from my mother and my grandparents. And I think that wherever you can find it, having one person who believes in you and you can count on, and it may be your mom, it may be your grandma, it may be an uncle, it may be a coach, whoever that is, you know, I think you have to kind of hang on to that. What Steph just described of people who believe in you, you may not always find it exactly the way you would want it, but somebody out there is believing in you, and you got to listen to them and bring them into your life. But the second thing, for me at least, that ended up being the most important thing was when I stopped thinking about myself and I started thinking about how can I be useful to other people. And I think that